So for the people that are in the class already, did we have any feedback about the midterm? No, the average was 68, which is low for sort of my courses. I didn't try to make the midterm difficult, but with talking with students, I got a sense that you guys had a lot due that week. So maybe it was sort of that had a play into it. So Kristen, was there a way that the midterm could have been better prepared for, like from my end? Because I had like the sample midterm, I had the assignment questions, I made the midterm just multiple choice. I feel like people like that better. Um, Anything else?
I don't think it was anything like on your end. We had a really big ergo lab due that week, and we had a midterm on the Monday. So I think it was just a lot of,
Like
we didn't
stuff.
have much study time. We only had one day of really studying for your midterm. So I think that's why a lot of us didn't do so well.
Yeah, like which was because usually like the averages for neuroscience were a lot higher, but this exam is cumulative. So I would just was going through with the students that like had emailed me just to go through the answers and kind of see where they got the answers wrong, more or less. And it wasn't like the harder of the questions on the midterm, just with the students that I saw. So there's 5 different ones, and maybe you found the same. But the questions they got wrong were ones where it was like pick the one that's not, or pick the one except the right answer. So people were selecting the like correct answers, but it wasn't like the question was asking for the one that was like the opposite. Did you guys find that? Or have you guys looked over your midterms? Anyone?
I haven't really gotten a chance to look over my midterm, but I think that could have been why, just because we've been overwhelmed that so much that week. So maybe a lot of us were just reading the questions super fast just because we've just had a lot going on.
Yeah, and that's like
Um,
that's
I
totally.
personally would have liked a lot more, like, there's nothing to do about it, but like I would have liked to study a lot more for your midterm than I did, but I couldn't really.
Yeah, like I usually, you know what, when it's in class, people are more vocal if there's a midterm the same week or whatever. But I guess because now it's all like individualized, no one really. I didn't know what you guys had due or really anything.
I think because I think you mentioned before that you couldn't really move the midterm, so I think that's why no one really mentioned anything about it.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, they wouldn't let me do it. Or usually I can like push it to the week before or whatever, but it was reading week. There's a bunch of issues.
Yeah, I
Oh
do think the
well.
midterm was fair though.
Yeah. The final will be the same sort of difficulty. Same thing with the like the questions from the assignments. The overall like motor control assignment is usually marked fairly easy. So everyone's like averages should be fine going into the final. Like if you get an A, then you should get an A. Just because if the midterm was only worth 23%, so go through and the majority of everyone has like a much higher averages on the lab reports and those lab quizzes and even on the assignments. So it should all sort of like balance out.
Do you think there would be a possibility to reweigh the final and the midterm at the end?
Potentially, you would see the. I think there's a. I could make it so that way if you do better on the final, then you just count that grade.
Okay, that would be cool.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to confirm with the faculty, obviously. But just stay on top of the assignments because like you should calculate your grade not using like Canvas because it's not taking everything into account. Just do the math and sort of like calculate what your grade would be going into like as of right now and then into the final, just with the percentages, and then it should give you a better idea of what your actual grade would be. So that way it should take some of the anxiety off because I think just by seeing the midterm, like the assignments are worth more overall than that first midterm was. So um, just understanding the percentages will help sort of maybe relieve some of the like anxiety you have about or everyone has about like needing a good mark on one assignment or one test. So Roy asked question. Yeah, so the assignment topic, what you want to do is you're basically read the rubric. It's in one of the modules, and the rubric and the presentation that depicts what the assignment is, and then you have to pick sort of a motor skill to analyze. And so what you want to do is you want to email your TA, just so that way we don't have duplicates of the same sort of exercise or same sort of motor skill. Aside from that, is there anything else that we could do better in the like I want everyone to do really well, right? Like that's sort of always what I want as the main priority. Is there anything else that you found everyone that could be done differently? Just to help you guys like learning. Of course, the labs have been a bit of a shit show in terms of like the organization of how that sort of went down. But I think, but now by like the fourth week, it's sort of coming together with in terms of like the process of how to complete them. Anything else? Yeah, so Megan, the only thing is that because if they're shown, then like every year I'll have to change around the questions. But what you could do is email your TA and then they can go through it with you so that you can see what the right answers are, just so you get a better idea. Okay, Drew said just the labs are confusing, which I would agree with. So yeah, so even if you don't feel comfortable like putting on the group chat, just email me directly. And if you want to set up a Zoom call, I can do that, or Google Meets.
I agree.
But remember, the final is go.
Just like the labs are hard because like the first one, Ryan did a really good job at like explaining how to do everything in lab chart, but then the second one, Heather didn't really explain how to do it, so it's kind of confusing on how to get the results.
What about the third one?
I haven't looked over that one yet. I'm doing that today.
Okay. So then, are you Melanie, or did some Melanie wrote that too? That lab 3 is sort of confusing. So I find that no one's really emailing the TAs, and so that would be that. I hopefully they're like, let me know if they are not responding to you. But because there's no set lab anymore, they should be like available like all the time for everyone. And then they've been working with Heather to sort of like produce the lab, so they have a better understanding of how like. I was aware of them when they were in person. They've changed them a little bit in terms of a format for the virtual stuff. So some of the questions that people were asking me, they knew better than I did. So I was almost like cutting out the middleman a little bit. Devontae's good at responding. Okay. We have a month left, a month and a half left, I think, in school. So just like keep me in the loop and we'll just work through it together if everyone's okay with that. For me, my main priority is for you all to do well. And I mean, obviously, like I'm running these lectures. So as long as you guys understand the, first and foremost, the lecture material, then I'm happy. And then I just want to make sure that you guys aren't sort of anxious with anything else related to the course. So let's start the lecture. So the first half of the course is sort of introducing motor control. And then the second half of the course, so the last 4 lectures, which I find are very sort of helpful in terms of like clinical or real life applications. They're all sort of related to motor skill learning. The topic, the breakdown of today's lecture is through 3 different sections. We're going to be defining and discussing learning. We're going to be talking about different learning assessment techniques, so like tests and transfer tests that we had talked about earlier. We're going to talk about the stages of learning and some of the characteristics that we observe change as people go from beginner to expert in learning a particular motor skill. And then we'll finish off the lecture by talking about transfer of learning. Is that okay, everyone? So let's first get into defining and assessing learning. So what was sort of the differentiating factor that defined what is motor learning? In comparison to motor control and motor learning are both evaluating motor skills or the performance of motor skills. Motor learning is more concerned with the factors or characteristics that are related to someone's ability to learn a motor skill through repetition. So with motor learning, the first question is, how do you assess whether someone has learned? What's one guess? One guess about the issue with motor learning. Yeah, so tests, you're right, Rita. That's how you have to do it. And the reason is because, like, to say, let's say, Rayuta, you're doing something. To say that you've learned something, there's no like, it's hard to objectively say that, oh, you are in the process of learning. The only thing that you can do to sort of give an idea of whether or not someone is learning is observe their behavior or observe their performance. And if the performance is increasing, it infers that they've obviously learned because they're getting better at something. So that's the issue with sort of motor learning. The assessment of learning must be achieved through inferences from observing performance during practice and tests. So when evaluating and judging someone, remember we talked about like evaluating motor skills and we had performance outcome and production measures. It's easy to describe or sort of grade someone's performance because you can see their performance through observable behavior. And you can sort of assess how well they performed that skill. Learning, on the other hand, is not directly observable. It's dependent on sort of seeing how the performance has changed over time. And then it's inferred, through observable behavior. So learning can be defined as a change in the capability of someone to perform a skill that must be inferred from a relatively permanent improvement in performance as a result of practice or experience. So the definition of learning then in terms of learning a motor skill is someone's ability to better perform or a better capability to perform a motor skill based on a relatively permanent improvement in their performance as a result of repetition or practice. So it's a process. So research has evaluated, so what are some of the observable characteristics of learning, right? So what are some of the inferences that we can make of observable behavior that would let us know or let us give us an idea that people are learning the motor skill or they're improving their learning? And so research has described 6 observable performance characteristics, and they are listed on this slide. So we're going to go through them individually. And so seeing improvement, consistency, stability, persistence, adaptability, and reduced attention demands characteristics are things that we can observe in observable behavior that will allow us to infer that learning has happened. So let's first talk about improvement. So as someone gets better and better at performing a motor skill, what can we say about their performance? Generally, with practice, their performance in a particular motor skill shows improvement. So you could define the improvement as a better ability to perform that particular goal of that particular action or motor skill. Now, with practice, learning isn't always limited to performance improvement, as with bad practice habits. You can develop negative sort of improvement or negative characteristics. So, if you are, give me an example, if you are cutting corners for a particular motor skill and you are sort of continuing that with repetition, you can sort of develop bad habits. So typically with repetition of performing and practicing of a motor skill that you're learning, you generally get better and better and a better ability to perform that motor skill. So your performance improves over time. Does that make sense, everyone? Awesome. Now, what about consistency? What is one thing that we notice about the consistency in someone's ability to perform a motor skill as they move through practice? When someone is like just learning a motor skill, usually they're up and down, right? Like, so sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. And then as they become better and better, they're more consistent with their performance. Their performance doesn't have like a deviation, it becomes more linear. Does that make sense? So they would say that with practice, you generally have an improvement in performance. You generally become more consistent in your performance. You become more stable. So stability, an observable characteristics of learning called stability, or sorry, stability infers that when someone is learning a motor skill, as they become better and better, they are able to not be affected by either internal or external perturbations. So as you become better and better at something, internal perturbations like arousal, stress level, and attention level have less of an impact on your ability to perform that. External perturbations would be things in the environment that would disrupt your performance. So like non-regulatory conditions like, light, dark, wind, the color of objects in the area, people yelling at you, spectators. As you become better at something, you are able to perform the motor skill regardless of whether or not you're stressed or anxious or there's external or internal perturbations. Does that make sense, everyone? If you think of someone that is a beginner, if you have, like, let's say they're playing basketball, you have them play basketball in practice and they're really good at free throws, you put them in a game situation where there's spectators and people yelling, all of a sudden they get rattled. Because they're not fully, an expert, the stability of their ability to perform that motor skill is decreased. They're unable to sort of still perform that skill with an external perturbation. So does that make sense with stability as an observable characteristic of learning? As you learn more and more out of a particular motor skill, you become more stable in performance. Okay. And then what about persistence? So what did we say about learning a motor skill? Do you forget that? Or once you put something in your long-term memory, does it ever go away? Yeah. So once we learn a motor skill, like think about you haven't ridden a bike in 8 years. You still know how to ride a bike, or you don't forget how to tie your shoes. That learning or that information is stored relatively permanently in your brain. And so what we notice is that as someone becomes better and better at a particular motor skill, like the time in between practices or the time between when they have to perform doesn't matter as much. So when someone is learning, if they have a week between practice, at the end of one practice and the beginning of the next one, there's going to be a drop in performance, right? Because they haven't practiced all week. As you become better and better at a motor skill, there's no drop off with time periods in between practice sessions or time between performance sessions. Adaptability is the fifth characteristics. Now, adaptability is different than the stability. Stability is being able to perform with internal or external perturbations. Adaptability is talking about changes in regulatory conditions. So remember, regulatory conditions are the things that would affect the way that you have to move, or regulatory conditions are the things that you have to pick out in the environment that dictate or the things in the environment that you have to conform your motion to. So as someone becomes better and better at a particular motor skill, they are able to continue like their high level of performance under a variety of varying performance characteristics. So the biggest example is talking about sports, right? As someone becomes a really good jump shooter, they're able to shoot at a relatively high level, regardless if they're being defended or it's an open shot or they're off balance or they are dribbling, because they have increased their adaptability. As you become better and better at a motor skill, you're better at picking out the regulatory conditions and adapting your motion or adapting your performance to those conditions. And then the last one is in relation to automaticity. So what we notice is that as people become better and better at a motor skill, they have a reduced attention demand. Remember we were talking about multitasking in the one lecture? I think that was last day. And as you become better and better at something, the amount of attention level or cognitive effort required sort of decreases, and then it allows you to multitask. So what we notice is that as people become better and better at a particular motor skill, their attention level that's required decreases. Everyone okay? So now let's talk about sort of like techniques that you could utilize to measure or sort of assess learning, which is a little bit difficult, right? And so sort of the 4 different areas that research has used to describe or like quantify the amount of learning is through what's listed on the slide: observing practice performance and observing for those 6 characteristics that we talked about in the last 4 slides, retention tests, transfer tests, and then coordination dynamics. So measuring how coordination changes. So these are the 4 sort of like ways that research has sort of, or techniques that research has used to assess learning. So let's first talk about, I'm just gonna move this window here. Let's first talk about how to sort of quantify learning through observing practice performance. And so we're trying to look at, or we're trying to sort of evaluate or quantify the characteristics that we had mentioned in the previous slides. So one way to do it is to look at performance curves. So performance curves are plotting outcome measures, and you're plotting performance over time. So like the performance after a certain number of trials. And then generally, if you're looking at outcome measures, the score for that would generally improve with practice sessions. So now I'll give you an example of what performance curves looks like, but you're mapping outcome measures. Does everyone forget what outcome measures are? Describe the sort of outcome of the performance. And so things like error, reaction time, distance, score, points, sort of the outcome, not kinematics. We're talking about outcome measures. And so what you do for performance curves is you plot an outcome measure, whatever it is relating to the skill that you're doing, and you plot that over a number of trials. And so what this does is it provides a sort of evidence, a numerical evidence of improvement, because we could see which way the curve is going. So if it's improving, then generally it's showing that they are learning through improvement. And then it also looks at consistency. So remember, as someone becomes better and better at a motor skill, learners tend to become more consistent with their capability to perform. And so we would notice that through decreased standard deviations. So let's look at an example of a performance curve. Oops. So here we have an example of a performance curve. So a hypothetical, this is a root mean squared error. So this was actually a continuous skill. And so it's a cumulative error score. And so this is the error score on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis, it's trials. So what do we notice? So high error is bad, low error is good. What do we notice about the general trend of the curve? Are they improving or getting worse? Yeah, so they're definitely becoming more consistent. And how do you know that, Arani? Like how can you say that they're getting more consistent? You're right. I just wanted to say it so that way people can notice. Yeah. So if you look at the scores, see how they like not jumping, like here they're jumping around, and then at the end they tend to be super consistent. So we've now, by plotting a curve of outcome measure, we have sort of shown, right, visually or quantifiably a learning. Does that make sense? You guys want to know a fun fact? I broke my foot. Yeah. Where it? Oh, do you want a real story or a fake story? Yeah. Oh, yeah. The fake story is I was fighting off line jumpers at the vaccine clinic. And the real story is I fell at my mom's house. I was bringing her coffee, trying to be a good son, and she didn't like salt the ice. She's old, so it is what it is. And then I slipped and broke out my foot. No, the coffee did not make it. No, and like the neighbors came out. There was a big like production. Yeah, super embarrassing. I'm just annoyed because I can't run. Boom. Okay, so with the performance curve that we just looked at, what did you notice like over time? So one thing that we noticed generally with like motor skill performance curves is that they are negatively accelerated. So Kristen asked, I broke my lateral malleolus on the left side. So it's a fibula. Yeah. Yeah. Own it. I'm just pissed off because it doesn't match my other shoe now. So do you guys see these performance curves on the right? So these are generally the 4 different sort of ways. So we have a linear curve, a negatively accelerated curve, a positively accelerated curve, and then an S-shaped curve. So when you plot those performance curves, you could generally have one of 4 sort of shapes. Now, of the 4, what do you think is the most prominent or most common when looking at motor skills? Yeah, B. So that would dictate that we see a lot of improvement initially, and then it sort of like tailors off over time. So I had this question a lot last year. So see how this is like increasing value? So this is what this previous slide looked like, except when they plotted, see how they plotted error? So instead of like error, like a high value is bad versus a low value is good. So it's negatively accelerated. It's just that when you did the outcome measure, this would be like, this is negatively accelerated as well, except they're plotting it where you have like a value like points or something, where more points is better. So just don't get confused. So we can all agree that and understand how you have a lot of learning initially and then sort of tailors off. Yeah? Everyone good? So now let's talk about what if you plot performance, what if you plot production measures? So remember, production measures are sort of talking about the movements during a trial. So outcome measures, you get 1 score for 1 trial. Production measures, they give you have a whole bunch of data for just 1 trial, and then you compare all the data. So you can't just make just 1 curve. So for example, like kinematic measures, remember kinematics are talking about how the points moved. What you have to do is you have to create a sort of curve for each trial. So it's a little bit more difficult. And if you're going to be plotting production measures, what they typically do is something like this, where they plot. So in this was a skill where they were trying to teach someone how to like, you had to move like a lever a specific way, and you had to sort of follow along like an Etch-a-Sketch. You had to follow along this trace pattern. And so the average of trials 1 to 10, you can see that the pattern that they created with the lever doesn't really look like what it's supposed to. And then see these dotted lines? That's standard deviation. So the deviation, like the consistency wasn't there because it was so wide. But if you look at trials like 200 to 280, 500 to 520, 750 to 760, see how now what they did looks like the trace pattern. So they've learned, right? But because it's a production measure, you can't just plot one curve. You have to sort of like compare individual trials. And so at least this allows us to show improvement, but it also allows us with standard deviation to look at consistency as well. Does that make sense, everyone? So depending on the skill and how you want to sort of analyze it, you can use both. But if you want to sort of graphically show, oh, look, this is my study, everyone that's learning, here's a negatively accelerated curve. That's the way you would sort of like show it visually. Any questions? D-dubs? Got anything to say? Everyone good? Okay. So now that was good. So that was using like measures to plot and make curves. Now let's talk about retention tests. Retention tests are specifically what you guys are used to with school, right? Our retention tests are tests of a practice skill that a learner performs following an interval of time after practice has ceased, right? So you have a test, like some driving test, you practice, and then you have a test on a set date. So the length of, the interval between last practice and the test is arbitrary. It depends on the situation. But the idea is that it's testing the permanence. So remember observable characteristics. Doing a test or a retention test, so testing your skill after a certain amount of time, tests your permanence. And if you know something better, or if you've practiced a skill and are really good at it, depending on, like, it doesn't matter as much the time in between, sessions or interval, the time interval, you should be still good at it. And so that's why, testing is good for school, but then for retention tests, it's important for motor skills. So the example of this would be the quizzes and tests that you do. Does that make sense? With motor skills, another way to sort of test is do transfer tests. So transfer tests is testing the adaptability of someone's motor skill learning. So remember, as someone is really good at performing a motor skill, they can now take that motor skill and apply it or adapt it to a wide range of different varying real world situations. So you guys remember that term adaptability? Transfer tests they involve using a novel situation in where the performer must perform that skill under a new situation. So think about practicing golf, and then the test is going to be practicing the test is a brand new golf course, right? It's brand new sort of environmental features, but it's still the same skill. So transfer tests, it depends on the skill that we're specifically looking at, depending on how you can modify it to make it a transfer test, but it can involve one of two things. So transfer tests would involve performing a practice skill in a context or situation different from a practice situation. So what you could do is, a lot of times in practice settings, you have augmented feedback where you get verbal feedback, you get coaching. You could see how they do with taking that feedback away, right? So that's a novel situation from practice, meaning that they're now not given the help, see if they still perform well. You could modify the physical environment. So the adaptability of relearning someone how to walk after a stroke. They practice down the hallway with the stroke bars. Sorry, that sounds bad. With the stability bars. what you can do is then, let's say you get them to walk in a brand new environment with a different service, different surroundings, and see if they're still able to do that. It's a transfer test because it's a new situation. You could also change personal characteristics. So this is talking about like changing internal, external perturbations. You could change the stress level of performance, see if they still do well, right? Like for example, like the military thing where they have to practice cleaning their gun and putting it together. Then they do it blindfolded. That's a test. They have to do it with their eyes closed. It's a transfer test. The second way that you could sort of modify to create something in a novel situation would be performing the skill in a novel situation. So think about what I said when talking about golf, where you're now having to perform the skill in a brand new sort of environment with new situations. So there's obviously some overlap, but the idea with trying to get the point I want to get across with you guys is that it's not a retention test, because a retention test is doing the exact same thing that you did in practice over a certain amount of like arbitrary interval of time between practice and then test. Transfer tests are, the test is a new situation for various different reasons, either internal, external perturbations, like feedback, physical environment, objects or regulatory conditions are all changed. You're changing the situation and see if they can adapt, or the learner can adapt their motor skill to a brand new situation. So it's a good way to test an ability, right? Like for sports, the easiest way to see if someone's been learning is a game situation, because it's all novel, right? You do all this stuff in practice, and then when they get to the game situation, it's like a transfer test. Does that make sense, everyone? Did I scoop ahead? You guys are good? Drew, Amna, Jessica, Ronnie, Ryuta? You guys want to smile? Cute. Okay. So the last one, so there was the 4 different ways. What do you guys, like just from personal experience, what would you say is sort of a characteristic in terms of coordination that you see of people that are learning? Initially, they are uncoordinated. And then as they get better, yep, you're right, Ronnie, they're definitely slower. What happens to the coordination as they get better and better? It becomes more fluid. So another way to assess learning is to like sort of evaluate someone's coordination. You can do it in different ways, but you would want to sort of utilize something to assess that their coordination has changed for the better as they're learning. And then if it's changing, that lets you know that they're learning by a certain amount or a certain degree. Now, the way that okay, so if you have someone that is a baseball player, and then you put a tennis racket in their hand and try to get them to hit a ball, how are they going to try to swing? They're going to try to swing like it's a baseball bat. Humans, what we do is when we're presented with a new situation, a new motor skill, we try to adapt other motor skills that we've already learned to that situation, and then we modify it. So typically, the initial way that people will start to try to solve how to do the motor skill is they'll adapt old motor or old coordination or old motor skills to that new situation. And then they'll take that with practice, modify it into a brand new coordination pattern that's specific for that particular motor skill. Does that make sense? That you try to solve a motor skill problem with things that you've done in the past, old motor skills that you've already learned, and then you modify those over time. This was one study that looked at sort of assessing coordination dynamics. So what you can see is that they had to do they had to move their hands in this particular way. Adaptability. So adaptability is when you are taking a motor skill and applying it to a brand new situation. So you are same motor skill, baseball, with with a so baseball with a beginner pitcher, and then like baseball with a better pitcher. Wait, that's not a good example. When you're talking about adaptability in terms of like coordination, Drew. So then adaptability is when you take a motor skill and you're applying it to a brand new situation. So it's the same motor skill under a new situation. So golfing under a new course, baseball under a new field, baseball against a new team. It's still the same skill. Whereas with this coordination idea, you're taking coordination from, I played baseball growing up and now I have to play cricket, or I don't know, something, a racket sport. I have to play badminton. I don't really know how to swing a badminton racket, but I do know how to play baseball. So I'm initially going to try and play baseball with it. And then I modify that movement pattern to be badminton. So see how it's a little bit different? Cool. Okay. So again, back to this study. So this is a study just showing coordination changes. So what they had to do was they had to move two levers and look at a monitor screen and move them in a way, because they were out of phase, where like an Etch-a-Sketch, they had to make a circle. So initially, when they learned to move so this is like, day one, pre-test, final, like after, so pre-practice, after practice, day two. So this is pre-practice, during practice, day one still during practice, and then this is post-practice. So see how like after practice, they've gotten a little bit to the circle to be able to do a circle. Now on day two, because they're learning, the permanence isn't there. They start off bad again, but then towards the end, they're able to make the circle. Now, some issues with practice or observing performance in practice. Now, we did say that practice or learning is inferred through observable performance, right? Now, one thing is that you need to be cognizant is that evaluating someone's performance in practice may be misleading, and misleading given the fact that they're learning more than they have. And it's for two main reasons. So the first reason is that practice may involve a performance variable that artificially like increases or decreases the person's performance. And I'll have an example of that on the next slide. And the second one is performance plateaus. Has anyone ever heard of those before? Because up to this point, we had those 6 observable characteristics. Then we talked about the ways to sort of quantify them and chart them out, right? Where we had the curves, we had retention tests, transfer tests, and coordination dynamics. That's the way to evaluate learning through observable performance during practice. Now, these two issues may sort of skew us to believe that someone's learning more than they actually have. And those are whether or not there's potentially a sort of a practice variable that artificially alters someone's performance. So here's an example of what that would look like. So here we have, this was a study where they were trying to teach people how to use crutches. And so what they had to do is they had to practice being able to put 30% of their body weight on the non-injured leg while holding crutches. And so they had 3 different groups. The first group is when they stepped on the force plate, they would get a visual on a monitor screen of how much weight was on their foot. KR means they would practice it, step off, and then the person would say, oh, yeah, actually, you only had 50%, or you had 20% of your body weight on your foot. Knowledge of results 5 means they would only get feedback after 5 trials. So they would practice for 30 seconds, whatever the time limit was, step off, practice again, do it 5 times, and then they would get the feedback. So what would happen is that in practice, the people that had concurrent or could read their body weight off of a monitor, they did the best in practice because they could read it. But if the retention test was just doing it without any feedback, you could see that even though they did the best in practice, the people that had the feedback concurrently did significantly worse in real life during the retention test. Does that make sense, everyone? So in this case, if you were looking just at the performance during practice, you would say, oh, the people that had a monitor learned the best because they had the best scores at the end. When really, because that monitor was there, they became dependent on it. So it was the factor that was artificially like improving their performance. Because when they did a retention test, it showed that the ones that had the monitor actually learned the less or least. So sometimes practice performance may do that. So you just need to be cognizant of it. If there's anything going on, whether like the way they're being coached, maybe the coach is always like telling them what they need to do, right? Maybe if it is a performance in like say baseball, maybe the pitcher is, it's always the same pitch. There could be sort of variables in practice that are altering, the performance to make you believe that that they've learned more than they have based on, high performance. The next one is performance plateaus. And so what you'll notice in research is what they debated whether or not this was actually a fact. But in a lot of motor skills, what they would see is, how things are negatively accelerated, the performance curves. They would typically see a point in time where you would have a plateau before there was more improvement. So what would be some reasons about why they would notice these plateaus in various different motor skills? Because if there's a plateau, right, the performance isn't changing, does that mean that they're not learning during that time? Anyone? Yeah, so because in this performance curve, it's an outcome measure. So yeah, that's true too. So both Courtney and Drew are right. But in this case, so here's error over time. So we'll just do this example. You can see how their error was decreasing, then it plateaued, and then started decreasing again. So there was a moment in time where their scores weren't improving. So does that mean that during this time they aren't learning? When really they actually are learning, but a reason why you could have a performance plateau in whatever you're actually measuring is for these three reasons. It could be a moment in time where, remember how we used to transition from an old coordination pattern to solidifying the new one for the new motor skill? Maybe it's a moment in time where they're still learning, but they're now adapting their coordination. They're adapting sort of their movement patterns. So their performance isn't showing it, like their scores aren't changing, but they're doing something, they're still learning. What if, and we'll get to this when we're really talking about like setting up practice, what if a performance plateau is a moment in time where someone just has like, oops, I fucked that up. Someone has poor motivation. So what is one thing that you notice in practice? If people aren't doing well, they can get frustrated. They can lose patience. If they aren't concentrating, they're not paying attention on what they're doing, they're not going to get any better. Maybe performance plateaus are a sign that the repetitions of people practicing, maybe if it's a period of poor motivation, fatigue, and lack of attention. So you as a coach need to, when you see performance plateaus, you need to encourage them. You need to help them. You need to like sort of understand why they're having low motivation, fatigue, or lack of attention. And then the last reason why you can have a performance plateau would be maybe the measurement that you are measuring has a ceiling or floor effect. Like it can only go so high or low so high. So you've like let's say like a thermometer, like those like punching things where like at the carnival where it only goes up with 999. So maybe someone punched harder, but they can only read a certain amount. So it's not a plateau. It's just not being able to read the performance change. So those are the reasons why you can have performance plateaus. Does that make sense, everyone? Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about now the stages of learning. About halfway through? Okay. So when talking about like sort of the stages that you would sort of observe that you would see someone go through when they're learning a particular motor skill, researchers wanted to sort of develop sort of a model to show like what stage of learning people were at when they're learning a motor skill. So there's been several models, but the two main ones are the two here. There was the original Fitz and Posner three-stage model that was talked about in a video at the beginning of the course. And then we had Gentile. Remember Gentile's taxonomy? She developed a two-stage model of learning. So this is the two, and they're sort of like on top of each other. One's not right or one's not wrong. They're just two different models talking about the same thing. So the Fitz and Posner model, and this came from behavioral psychology, so it was developed a lot earlier, so in 1967, it proposed that motor skill learning involves three stages. Those stages are the cognitive stage, the associative stage, and then the autonomous stage. So in the initial cognitive stage, when someone is learning a new motor skill, the beginner is focusing on cognitively solving the problem of what to do and how to do it. And if you were to observe someone's practice or performance during the cognitive stage, it's marked by many gross errors and lack of consistency because they're just beginning, right? Initially, when we learn a motor skill, you either see a demonstration of how it is done and then you try to mimic it, or imagine if you were like not given demonstration at all. You had to learn for yourself through repetition. You got to figure out, okay, so I am going to play basketball, never seen, no idea what to do. I have to figure out what's the best way to shoot this ball, like this, one hand. Through repetition, the person is cognitively figuring out what to do to achieve the goal of the particular motor skill that they're learning. And so through repetition of errors and trial and error, the person is figuring out what to do. And that's sort of like what the main sort of focus of the cognitive stage would be. Cognitive because the person's thinking about it. The associative stage would be the next stage. And it's where the person has learned like specifically what they need to do. And now that they're understanding the movement pattern required to achieve the skill, now they can learn to associate environmental information into the required movement. So they can learn about the regulatory conditions and how it would affect their ability to perform the motor skill, or how they have to change their motion, or what they have to adapt in their motor skill to adapt it to new regulatory conditions. So this is the refining stage where the performer has sort of acquired the basic fundamentals of the skill, but they are working on becoming more consistent and being able to adapt that motor skill to new and changing environmental conditions. So it's what's called the associative stage. And then the last one in the Fitz and Posner model would be the autonomous stage, where this is the final automatic stage where the person has become autonomous, where they are an expert at what they're doing. And what is one thing that what are several things that we've talked about that when someone reaches, a level of automaticity when performing a motor skill, they have a lower amount of attention required, so they can now multitask. And the other thing too is that not all learners will progress to this stage. So if you just keep practicing, you're not automatically going to get to the autonomous stage. It is dependent on the quality of instruction and how much a person concentrates on it. They have to be like, so you guys ever heard the term like, oh, he's a pupil of the game, right? Like, so LeBron James or Kobe or Sydney, or have you guys ever heard those terms? Like when people like sportscasters are describing like a really good athlete, they're like, oh, he's a student of the game. He's a pupil of the game. It's in relation to the fact that someone, as they go from the associative stage to the autonomous stage, to really become an expert at something, you have to always be learning, forcing yourself to learn and figure out what you don't know and being able to understand better that motor skill. And that's what's required, the conscious cognitive effort to improve. And that's going to allow you to progress to the autonomous stage. It just doesn't automatically happen. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. So the next model is still talking about the stages of learning, but it's Gentile. So it was a little bit later, right? So this is 2000. She developed a two-stage model of learning. So the Fitz and Posner was 3 stages. This one is 2 stages. So she describes an initial and later stage of learning. But the way that she described it is because you guys remember the taxonomy, how he was talking about these regulatory conditions. Remember the axes from Gentile's taxonomy? She related it to that. So that way you could get a better idea of like quantifiably saying, based on this chart, this person is in this stage of learning versus this stage of learning. Just a little bit, that's why there was difference. So the initial stage of learning for the Gentile's two-stage model of motor skill learning. So in the initial stage, the person is cognitively trying to get an idea of what movements are required to achieve the goal. And they learn two specific goals. The first one is to organize their movement pattern to enable some degree of success in achieving their action goal or the goal of the motor skill. And then as they progress through the initial stage, they start to be able to discriminate between regulatory and non-regulatory conditions in the environmental context. So remember, regulatory conditions are those things in the environment that will change the way we have to move. And so when researchers looked at, like, for example, drivers, beginner drivers look everywhere, whereas expert drivers or drivers that with a lot of experience know where to look, what's the most important. So with using eye goggle research, what we've noticed is that as you become better at something, you're better able to pick out in the environment what's required or what's most important in a lower amount of time. So what's happening is that through repetition, the person is becoming better at picking out in the environment what are the regulatory conditions. Those conditions, right? Objects, people, support surface that are going to modify the way that you have to perform the motor skill to achieve the action goal. So at the end of the stage, learners develop an effective approach of like sort of achieving the task or the goal of the motor skill, but they lack consistency and potentially efficiency. So therefore, in the later stages of the two-stage model, Gentile suggests that that person is now learning to adapt their movement pattern to any performance situation. They improve and increase consistency, and then they are able to, what do we notice when people become better and better at something? They become to do it more like, efficiently. CE, what does that say? I like it. Is everyone okay? So the one thing with Gentile's two-stage model that was important or different, she was suggesting that this whole idea of like fixation versus diversification, that's a unique feature of the later stages. So as someone is in the later stages of learning where they're learning to adapt movement pattern to the demands of any performance situation, having improved consistency or performance with economy of effort, she would suggest that those later stages are different depending on whether or not they're learning a closed motor skill or open motor skill. And that wasn't really talked about in the Fitz and Posner model. So closed motor skills, remember, they are self-timed. So we're choosing when we do them. So closed motor skills, nothing is changing. So what they're suggesting is because the environmental conditions aren't moving or changing, that the person is developing a fixation of their movement pattern. There's really solidifying it. Versus open motor skills, where things are moving, you always have to adapt to the environment, where in the later stages of learning, people are trying to, with learning, diversify the motor skill. Because in a real life situation, it's an open motor skill. It's always going to be under new conditions. So if you're going to play darts, that's a closed motor skill. As you get better and better, you're going to practice just shooting like the darts, right? Whereas if you're playing basketball, you may initially start like, okay, practice shooting from one spot, practice dribbling. You're going to, when you're getting better and better, you want to be able to be a shooter from everywhere in the court. You're going to diversify that motor skill and try to do it under varying conditions. Does that make sense, everyone? So the big idea with Gentile's taxonomy was that she said that the later stages of learning are a little bit different in terms of what people are focusing in on, whether or not it's a closed versus open skill. And remember, she was big on regulatory conditions, right? She developed that axis, that chart. So that's where she's coming from. You guys okay? Boom. Okay. So now let's talk about some of the performer and performance changes that are seen across the stages of learning. So we've already talked about the observable characteristics of learning. Let's see some of the things that research has shown change as people progress through the stages of learning. So we talked about this whole idea of negatively accelerated learning. So what we notice in research is that the rate of change of improvements tends to decrease over time. So there's a big increase in performance and then it sort of plateaus. So the negatively accelerated curve is typical of learning motor skills. And so here we have an example that this was like cigar rolling factory in 1959. And so they had like stats on people's ability to roll cigars after look here, 7 years working. And so their improvement would improve and then the improvement would slow over time. This is another example of a negatively accelerated curve. We've talked about the changes in movement coordination, right? You're trying to adapt. And when you're learning a brand new motor skill, whatever the human, they're going to take their previous experiences and try to change it, try to use that to solve the new motor skill. And so what they end up doing is they trying to figure it out. Oh, this is what we have to do. And then they sort of change their coordination. So to perform a skill, what we notice is the freezing of degrees of freedom issue. So what we notice with people performing a brand new motor skill is that they tend to so remember the issue with motor control is the degrees of freedom problem, that we have so many joints that how does our body control all of them at once and try to figure it out? When we're learning a motor skill, what researchers have shown is that there is what's called a freezing of degrees of freedom. So see this guy, I think what is that, a racquetball racket? When someone's learning to perform a brand new motor skill, they will tend to freeze their sort of their limb, so that way they're only moving one joint. So they get used to it, so that guy is going to be practicing hitting, right? So he's gonna practice just doing like this, just using his shoulder, and then over time he'll add in his elbow, and then he'll add in his wrist. Can you guys think of any other examples of where you see that? It's typical of all motor skills, where initially someone will try and figure out what they have to do, and then they will not move. They'll only move one joint, try to get used to it, and then they will successively add on more and more movement. Yeah, throwing a baseball, at the end you use your wrist. Learning to skate, you end up just using your hips, and then eventually you can use your knees and feet. Yeah, kicking a ball is a good one. So initially people will just use their knee, and then they'll eventually be able to use their hip and really give into it. So what happens is that volleyball serve, so yeah, exactly. So we've all come up with a whole bunch of different examples for this freezing of degrees of freedom issue. And so what happens is as the person performs the skill and gets better and better and better at it, now obviously coaching can speed up the process, but as they become better and better, they have a freeing or unfreezing of the degrees of freedom. So they have an unfreezing of the joints so they can add more and more into it. Does that make sense, everyone? Cool, right? So if that's the issue, so remember we're all trying to relate this into sports, but also into rehab. So if you want someone to relearn how to do something, start with one joint and then add more and more together. Here we have another example of the freezing of degrees of freedom. So here they were plotting knee versus hip angle. Pre-practice, you can see there was not a lot of movement. Whereas post-practice, if there's a lot of movement, it just means that they were moving their hip and knee not in unison because they're unfreeing their joints. But again, we see this with all different sports. And then based on what Drew was saying a couple slides ago, remember that all of us have developed a large repertoire of movement patterns that we prefer to use, right, based on our previous experiences. If humans are sort of presented with a brand new situation, they're going to try and first solve it with previous experience, and then they're going to have to modify that coordination or that movement to develop a brand new motor skill. And typically when they're changing the coordination, that's when it's the most frustrating because they're the most inconsistent. And so it's that stage where we see performance plateaus. And so as a like sort of instructor or as a coach, that's when you really want to try to provide, like, and we'll get into this in the next lectures, but this is where you want to try to provide motivation to make sure that the person is still sort of motivated and engaged in learning. Because cognitively, if someone's not sort of into what they're doing, like if you're trying to study but you're also watching Netflix, you're not really studying well, right? You're kind of like multitasking. So you want to make sure that someone's always engaged in what like they're supposed to be practicing. Here are some other changes that we could see. So in terms of efficiency, as someone becomes better at performing a motor skill, typically what we see is like the amount of muscles used change. So they usually become more efficient, either in terms of like using, the least amount of muscles possible in the best way, or they change the amount of energy that they expend. So they're more like sort of efficient. We've talked about changes in visual selection. So as people can become better at motor skill, their eyes aren't sporadic. They're very focused on only the most like significant, important regulatory conditions of that situation or of the environment. And remember, conscious demands. So as someone becomes better and better at something, it requires less of their attention, which is why it's important to go from, to get to the expert stage, you have to force or teach the person to always be cognitively concentrating on what they're doing. Because once they get really good at something, it's hard to not think about other things. We see better ability in error detection and correction capability. So when we see like dancers that are learning a motor skill, or when dancers are learning to dance, they look at their feet. When skaters are learning to skate, they look at their skates, right? And then over time, they're better able at using their own proprioception to give them that information, and then they can use their eyes for other things. In motor skills, we generally use vision as a priority. And then as you become better and better at the motor skill, you're better at using proprioception. And this is what this slide here shows, is that through an improved ability to sort of register your own proprioception or your own body awareness, you're better able to utilize that information without the need of vision. So when we had experts versus novice gymnasts, this was their performance. So number of errors when they're performing a particular skill. With vision, they both had like not a lot of errors. And when they took a removed vision, see how the errors increased, obviously, but it was still significantly less for the skilled people. They were better able to know their body awareness without vision than would be the beginners. And then the last one is brain activity. So what we've noticed is that like sort of the brain activity changes, and this is sort of coming out with all of that MEG sort of research, that the areas of the brain that are sort of activated when performing a motor skill change on what stage of learning you're at. So initially, because you're trying to like develop the motor program, we see that the cerebellum is highly activated, and in the end, it becomes more basal ganglia because it's automatic. The cerebellum already knows whatever is the motor program, and it's the basal ganglia that's initiating go, stop, go. Remember the executive loop? I don't know if you guys remember that. You guys okay? Now, one thing that does not change across stages of learning is that when someone is practicing, so this is kind of related to that that like crutches example, when like people were trying to learn by using the monitor. Humans, and this is true of human motor control and learning research, is that humans, when learning a motor skill, will become dependent on whatever sensory information is available in practice. So if you are, if you're practicing and in a real life situation, depending on whatever motor skill is, there's going to be a huge change where they're not given the same sensory information. It's going to lead to negative or bad learning. The sensory processes that it's called the practice specificity hypothesis, because remember, when we initiate the movement, we're taking in all the regulatory conditions. We're using all of our sensory processes, vision, touch, proprioception, hearing, all a bunch of different cues, and we're processing that to allow us or use that information to allow us to go and perform the motor skill. If some of that sensory information is removed when in like the test or in real life situation when you have to do the skill, they're not going to perform very well because they're so used to it. Imagine like where, you're teaching someone how to ride a bike and they always have training wheels. So 3 days a week, they're practicing learning a bike with training wheels. And then after a week, you take the training wheels off, give them a bike and say, try to learn. Now, all of a sudden, it's like something completely different. They're not used to sort of the information. It's the different information that they're provided now when performing a skill. And that's because, remember we were talking about memories? To input have a stronger imprint or memory, you are adding more and more, consolidating more of the memory or representing more of that information you're trying to remember when you have more information. It's the same idea where people will become dependent on the sensory information available with practice. That becomes ingrained in the ability to perform the motor program in terms of in memory. Does that make sense, everyone? So if anything from this slide is just to know that if you're going to be teaching someone, you want to make sure that you're not like in practice giving them stuff that's making it so easy that they're not going to be able to use in real life because they're not going to be able to translate that. Awesome. This next part is talking about expertise. And so we talked about in the last couple slides that to become an expert, it's not just automatic through practice. It's also has to be a product of the right type of practice. So practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Have you guys ever heard that term? So when we evaluate experts, so depending on whatever motor skill we're looking at, if we have thanks Adam, I made it myself. It's gonna be a hit single. I'm gonna drop some lyrics. We should have a motor control album. But if you were to take experts and sort of look at some common characteristics between experts, right? So now you're taking not people that are good at a skill, you're looking at experts. What are some common characteristics that we notice of experts? So what's the difference between experts and people that are just good at a motor skill? There's 3 common characteristics. The first type is that experts have a much larger amount of practice and the right type of practice. So back with that phrase, Adam, it's not practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Experts tend to show a much greater knowledge structure, right? Student of the game. Experts will know more about an activity and skill than non-experts do, and they will utilize that information to make faster and more appropriate decisions. And with eye goggles, remember the whole Ronaldo thing, experts are way better and efficient at their vision because they're way better at picking out the regulatory conditions that are most important. So these are the sort of the characteristics that we notice with experts. And remember what we were saying is that you have to make sure that to get to a level of expertise where you don't want it to become fully automatic because you always need to have the learner cognitively thinking about what they're doing. So what they say here is that experts avoid the minimal attention requirements that occurs with complete automaticity. They want to sort of maintain a level of cognitive or conscious control to continue to adapt and make new improvements. So by doing that, they say that experts could maintain a higher degree of consciousness of that particular motor skill. And that's what makes the expert. I'm not going too fast, guys. Does that make sense? Be honest with me. Oh, yeah, a question from Ivan. So would being an expert also characterize you as a professional or no? So a professional is someone, is by definition, is someone that does it as a job. So a pro athlete is an athlete that does it for a job. A health professional is someone that does that as a job. So typically with professional in terms of like a job setting, it means like you have a regulatory college. You're held but to certain standards. Whereas I don't know if you're talking about Ivan. Sorry, I don't know, Ivan, if you're talking about like sort of which, but if you're talking about sports, a professional is someone that's getting paid to do like a job, to do their motor skill. The term expert is talking about someone really good. So dependent really or not if they get paid, it's two different things. Expert is like describing the performance. Yeah, does that make sense, Ivan? Performance is, expert is describing the performance, whereas professional is describing like the stage or the level at which they are like, doing their sport. Yeah, that makes sense. Boom. Okay. So now we're going to be talking about transfer of learning, and then so just a couple slides, and then we're done. So transfer of learning is sort of this idea that our previous experiences will affect our ability to perform a new motor skill. So like I was saying, how humans tend to try and adapt their old repertoire of motor skills they've learned. They will take all of that and then try to adapt it to a brand new situation, right? Whatever new motor skill that they're learning. And so our previous experiences tend to affect our ability in a new skill. So our previous experiences can result in a positive transfer, a negative transfer, or a neutral or zero transfer of learning. So if you are doing two skills that are very, very similar, you being an expert in a similar skill will have a positive transfer on your ability to learn like the new skill that's similar. Because it's similar, you've already done some of the cognitive background. Sometimes your previous experience, like the whole baseball versus tennis, two different swings. Now, if you were to take someone that had no experience with racket sports, no baseball experience, no nothing, and got them to learn tennis versus taking a baseball player to learn tennis, initially in the first like couple trials or so, the baseball player is going to try and swing the tennis racket like a baseball bat. And so that previous experience has a negative or hindering sort of effect on their learning. And then eventually through time, it'll go away. But sometimes previous experiences can hinder someone's learning initially. And then sometimes like me being able to type has no bearing on whether or not I'm good at volleyball. And a lot of the times it doesn't have any effect. So let's talk about positive transfer. So positive transfer is very important because it's like building. So when we talk about Gentile's taxonomy, that's based on the concept of positive transfer, where you start off with something easy and then you get significantly harder, because with each step, you're adding a new skill potentially, right? So you're building one on top of the other. That's built on this whole idea of positive transfer, or previous experiences have an effect on your ability to learn a new skill. If they're similar, it tends to lead to positive transfer. So that's why technically with school curriculums, right? Like you had, think about high school. I don't even remember. Math 1, Math 2, there was like grade 11 chem, then there's grade 12 chem. Like the curriculums are that they build on each other. Even within courses, right? You have each units that technically are supposed to build on each other. And that idea is that, you initially have to learn one motor skill, And then it becomes easier to first learn, the initial one, and then you have something a little bit harder. So it has this idea of like positive transfer. Does that make sense, everyone? And then the next thing is, remember we talked about transfer tests? What was a transfer test? It was a way to test learning. And what you do is you have someone perform a motor skill under a brand new sort of environment. You're testing whether or not they were able to transfer that knowledge into a brand new scenario. It's a way to test your using transfer tests, or is positive transfer, is a way to sort of assess learning. Why do you think positive transfer will occur? And there's two different reasons why potentially we see sort of your ability to perform a motor skill improving their ability to perform the next motor skill. And that would be because of potentially a similarity of the skill or context components. So if you have two skills that are sort of have a degree of similarity in terms of, if you have two skills that are similar in terms of their kinematic profiles and sort of like the movements that are required, people are already going to have sort of an understanding of, remember, as we get better and better at motor skills, we are better at proprioception. We've learned how to sort of take errors, understand our body. That understanding is going to transfer to the brand new skill if we've already had previous experience. And so that's your ability to understand sort of your own sort of body awareness. The next thing is potentially with cognitively. So if you've had previous experience, remember whether they're doing a motor skill, think of the Fitz and Posner model or the Gentile's model. The initial stage was about figuring out in your brain cognitively what to do, sort of understanding the scenario, understanding what to do, what not to do, how to deal with errors. All of that processing is what happens in the initial stage. So if you have two skills that are similar, if someone has previous experience with a similar skill, they've done a lot of that sort of error correction, cognitive processing, and that would be applied to the brand new skill. So those are some of the reasons why like positive transfer, like it makes sense, but that's why there would be, like similar context will lead to a positive transfer of information. So negative transfer can occur, right? And that's when it's rare, but when previous experiences will hinder initially someone's performance with practicing a brand new skill. So that can happen under sort of two different conditions. The first one would be where you have a similar environmental context, so the same sort of surroundings, but it requires a different response. So does anyone remember, like, so you get a new car, okay? You get a new car, and your initial car had where you change the gears, or you had the shifter at the bottom, and then you get a brand new car, and then the shifters on like where the like on the wheel. Has anyone ever had that? Where they get in the car and then they're trying to like, they don't know what to do. You're trying to figure out how to like get the car and drive, and you're hitting the windshield wiper. Like, does anyone ever remember that? So your previous experience of driving a car with the settings in different locations initially hinders your ability to drive the new car because it's all of a sudden different. So you're used to, oh, I want to drive. I used to do this. Like your movements are a bit different. It's the worst, right? It's so annoying. But with repetition, you get used to it and then you're fine. Right? The other thing is that with a negative transfer of learning, so it's not only in like when environmental features have changed a little bit, it's also when the timing sequence changes. So let's say you're used to doing a specific rhythm at a specific timing for whatever motor skill, and if all of a sudden that changes, it tends to screw you up because you're so used to the one particular pattern that now you have to modify. You have to unlearn the old one before you can learn the new one. So it's rare, but that's where negative transfer occurs. And so these are the three main reasons why cognitively or why, in terms of a motor skill perspective, it can occur in the brain. So remember perception action coupling? It's being aware of the environment and how that affects your ability to perform the motor skill, or like how the environment modifies, how the regulatory conditions modify your movement. So with the car example, you have an established perception action coupling that is now changed. This leads to cognitive confusion, right? Because you have to think about it again. You're like, oh, it used to be automatic. Now I have to you have to cognitively tell yourself not to do the old pattern. That's called cognitive confusion. And so your old coordination pattern, like you're so used to doing it, you have to unlearn. You have to tell yourself to stop doing the old pattern to do the new one. You have to unlearn the new skill. So when we have the negative transfer of learning, it is not forever. It's just initially when you're starting to learn. It adds a level of difficulty because the person has to unlearn their old pattern and modify the new one for the new motor skill. Now, there is one general character principle of learning that I wanted you guys to know, and it's called this whole idea of of learning to learn. And so research has shown that how many of you guys have all the electives that you're not really interested in? There is an idea that, and it's been proven that learning a new motor skill or learning a new course, even though it's not something that you're particularly interested in, you still have the fundamentals of understanding material, organizing, studying, looking up stuff. You still have the same skills from learning a course that you're not specifically interested in will be applied to those same skills that are applied through, it doesn't matter what course you're learning. It's the same thing with motor skills. So with learning new motor skills, remember when they say, when you're young, what did they tell kids? Do as much as you can and try to get used to doing all different types of stuff. And then as they get older, then you home in on whatever sports they think is the most exciting or the most interesting to them. Have you guys ever heard that? It's because of this whole concept of learning to learn. So if you become familiar with learning, you become a better learner. That make sense, everyone? Awesome. Okay, and now last slide. So this was just one thing that I wanted to talk about really quickly, this whole idea of bilateral transfer. And it's super interesting, and just wanted to sort of discuss it really quickly. So it came from this idea that what happens if, okay, so Drew, I'm going to teach you how to play darts. Okay, now the test is to do darts with your left hand, but I teach you how to play darts with the right hand. Now, having learned the motor skill with the opposite arm, is that going to improve your ability to do darts or learn darts with the opposite hand versus someone that is just learning just with the left hand? Will your previous experience of the other limb improve your ability to learn? Does that make sense, everyone? And then the question is, what do you think? So that's what's bilateral transfer. Transfer from one limb to another. Okay, and so what research has shown, so here we have an example. So they were doing a motor skill where you had someone or comparing people that would learn a motor skill with the opposite hand and then see how it transferred to their ability to perform the action with their opposite hand. And what it proved with this whole idea of asymmetric transfer, that if someone learns with their preferred limb, so like, what are you, Drew? Right-handed or left-handed? Right-handed. Okay. So if I teach you how to play darts with your right hand, let's say to get to a level of like whatever level is we'll deem good, Okay, yeah, fair enough. Same with me. So I'm left-handed, but everything I do with my right. So, if we learn how to play darts with our right hand and counted how many practice trials it would take to see how good you like to get to a certain level. Let's say it took 100, right, to get that good. Now, if I practice with my left hand, because I've already practiced with my right hand, it would only take 50 trials to get that good because the learning is transferred from one limb to the other. That transfer of learning is better with learning with the preferred limb and transferring it to the non-preferred limb versus vice versa. So because technically we're right-handed with motor skills, if we learned in the left hand, let's say it would take 100 times, it would still take 75 for the right hand. But this is interesting because what happens is, remember this whole idea of motor equivalence, where learning how to write, it's the same writing style, writing like calligraphy pattern. It just doesn't matter which, like people did it with their teeth, with the right hand, mirror image. It had the same sort of like structure of letters, right? This whole idea of like transfer of learning bilaterally to the different limbs. How this is applied in research or in sort of a clinical aspect is that what they do now is so a lot of amputees, like so diabetic amputees, like there's time between the like it's not an emergency like acute situation where they lost their limb. What they do now is they will have patients practice with a fake device with their good arm before the amputation of the opposite arm because it will speed up the process of them having to learn using the prosthetic post-surgery. And that's why I have a video of that. But that's based on this whole concept of bilateral transfer of learning. So transferring of learning from one limb to another. And so what would be some of the reasons that you guys would think that that would happen? So the first one is this whole cognitive explanation that if you are learning with one skill, learning a motor skill with one limb, you've done a lot of the cognitive stuff. You've done the error detection. You've figured out what to do. You've done a lot of the baseline brain work. So then it's quicker when learning with the opposite limb. The second one is this whole idea of the motor program, where if that motor program is in there, the limb you use to successfully complete that motor program is a parameter, which is a test on the midterm. Just a question on the midterm. So that program is there, just like writing, and then whatever limb you use is just added to that program. So research obviously supports both explanations, but they're potentially what's happening. Would being ambidextrous improve bilateral? Yes. Yep. Because what do you think the difference is in understanding preferred limb versus non-preferred limb? You use your preferred limb more. So if you look at research, you're better at understanding your own, like close your eyes and move your preferred limb. You're better at understanding proprioception. So you're better at that cognitive like error detection, understanding. So if you're ambidextrous, your ability to like sort of understand your proprioception is equally as good in both sides. Or you could be uncoordinated, like, I don't know who do I want to pick on. No, sorry, Drew, I won't pick on you. You could be uncoordinated like me and then just be bad at proprioception on both limbs. Okay. Guys, okay? That is the lecture for today. No questions? Awesome. Cool. I really all want you to do well. I hope that you guys can email your TAs to go over your midterm, any other issues. I just want the, like, I like this course. Oh, when is time for the final exam? It came out. When was it? I will do a posting. I got the 19th. Yeah, that's what it is. The 19th at like 12. Yeah, boom. Oh, and guys, please start your assignments. The rubric's right there. You're all gonna get 90%, but you just do it. Everyone good? Yeah, final is cumulative. Yep. Yeah, so final is cumulative, so it's even more important for you to go just review your midterms so you kind of know where you did. I like honestly when I went through with the people, so it was 5 people with their midterms, it was they got the easy questions wrong, and then the neuroscience ones. I also did curve the midterm. If people if everyone got it wrong, I just gave everyone the mark. Cool. Okay. Bye everyone. I had a patient. God bless. There you go. Spring is coming. See you guys next week. Email me. Bye.